Okay, the name of this video is How Do Cell Phones Affect Your Brain? And this video is based largely on the paper by Martin Pall. There's numerous papers. There's over 50 papers all supporting what I'm about to tell you, but I'm going to specifically go through a paper by Martin Pall written in 2013. I'll show you this slide here now and give you the overview explanation, and then I'll go into more detail because this might be a lot of information all at once. I call this an AO, academic orgasm alert, because it's very interesting and it's very useful to know this. So first of all, we're exposed to a tremendous amount of EMF, electromagnetic fields, due to cell phone towers, laptop computers with their Wi-Fi, router Wi-Fi, smart meters, things like this device over here. Okay, so the EMF then comes into the person. Here's the person holding their cell phone to their head. They shouldn't do that. They should hold it out in front of themselves. And a woman should not hold it tight to her chest right next to the breast, because it'll increase the risk of breast cancer if that's done for a prolonged amount of time. Anyways, the EMF then opens up VGCC. That means voltage-gated calcium channels. And then what's in red here will be inhibitors of this pathway. For example, the calcium channel blockers will inhibit the effect of opening the voltage-gated calcium channels. And they used to think it's just an L-type calcium channel. No, it's other types of calcium channels as well. That's now been shown. Once the voltage-gated calcium channels are open for a cell, and they're located in the plasma membrane of a cell, the outer membrane of a cell, that will lead to increased calcium entering the cytoplasm, because the concentration of calcium outside of a cell is 15,000 times higher than it is inside a cell. So you open up a channel, zoom, that calcium will rush into the cell. Now you will have increased calcium in the cytoplasm. That will activate an enzyme called calmodulin. And once calmodulin is bound to the calcium, you can call it calcium calmodulin, some people call it calcam, but the bottom line is you have activated this enzyme. This enzyme will then activate two forms of nitric oxide synthase. So nitric oxide synthase is NOS. I've got the little stuff next to it right here. I have an E for endothelial nitric oxide synthase, which is, in the vast majority of circumstances, a good thing, okay? And in this lecture, we're not going to get into all the controversies, which I've actually figured out how to resolve, but we're not going to get into those right now. I'm just giving you the basic pathway. And I maybe overdid it with this nomenclature here, but I want you to get this so that when you read more about it, you'll be able to understand everything very quickly. So endothelial nitric oxide is usually abbreviated eNOS. So E for endothelial, NOS for nitric oxide synthase. It's also called nitric oxide synthase type 3. The way I remember that is the letter E has little 3 things coming off it, and you can remember that for the 3. The reason why they'll call it by the number sometimes is because it's also located in other locations. This one is bound in the plasma membrane of the cell. But the key thing to know is it's called NOS3 because it's in other locations as well. But most of the time, for our purposes, we're going to be talking about it with regard to the endothelium. And this is the good nitric oxide synthase. This is the one Dr. Esselstyn wants you to try to increase and maintain its function in your arterial lining cells. The lining cells of the artery are called endothelial cells. Okay, now there's another nitric oxide synthase located in neurons. And I'll call this is N for neuronal, NOS, and it's type 1 NOS because, again, it can be located in other places besides neurons. The way I remember 1 for N is because there's one letter N and you have the number 1. Trust me, that's going to be useful later, but just that's enough to know for now. Okay, so the nitric oxide synthase enzymes will then produce increased nitric oxide. And again, I show in red that if you put a nitric oxide synthase inhibitor into the experiment, you will block the production of nitric oxide and you will block the effects of EMF. Just like calcium channel blockers will block the effects of EMF. Okay? Now, the good nitric oxide, the one we all learned about with Dr. Esselstyn, with, the PhDs, Nathan Bryant and Beth Shirley, they're all doing good work, is you will get an increase in guanylate cyclase, and that'll lead to increased cyclic GMP, and that'll lead to increased protein kinase G, and you get these good effects leading to vascular smooth muscle cell relaxation. In other words, it'll keep your arteries open. And the NO also does good things when it gets into the blood and it prevents platelets from clotting. It's all around good thing for your arterial health. Okay, but when you have abnormal, excessive amounts of nitric oxide produced in the context of excessive EMF exposure. And there's other ways that this can happen. And there's another nitric oxide synthase enzyme we're going to talk about in the future called inducible nitric oxide synthase. And that's going to be very important. But for now, I just want to get through what the cell phones do. Okay, so this is the bad pathway of excessive nitric oxide where it doesn't belong. Okay, and this will often be in a context where there's increased superoxide. There's reasons why that happens. We will talk about that in future lectures, but there's ways that NOS can be uncoupled, and there's other reasons why superoxide, O2 minus, I write it as because it's a free radical. There's an unpaired electron in its outer orbital. This can be a big problem. Now, I write the inhibitor, SOD, superoxide dismutase, here with the X because when that's increased, that can block this pathway as well. But the key point is this. The bad pathway of nitric oxide involves it combining, reacting with superoxide, O2 minus here, to form something called peroxynitrate. Peroxy is when you have two oxygens right next to each other. So this is ONOO for peroxynitrite. And this ends up being a big deal because this will tend to cause harmful reactions, okay? I put AO here to mean antioxidants. So when you eat your adequate antioxidants, you're less likely to get these reactions. Your antioxidants help you to maintain your antioxidant defense system to prevent these reactions occurring, okay? So this would be called a reactive oxygen species, a free radical that undergoes abnormal harmful reactions. This would be called an RNS, reactive nitrogen species, the peroxynitrite. Okay, and then you will also produce hydroxyl radicals. And there's other types of radicals, but we're not going to get into that right now. I'll just briefly mention to you some of the ways that they confirm these things in their research. When you have increased oxidative stress from peroxynitrite, you're going to get increased 3-nitrotyrosylation. Okay, so we'll get into that more later, but you're also going to have DNA breaks. You're going to get breaks in the DNA, and you can measure that with a COMET, what's called a COMET assay, to show the DNA breaks. You're also going to get decreased mitochondrial function, and the decreased mitochondrial function will manifest as decreased ATP production, which of course is bad. Okay, having high energy is a good thing for your cells. So anyways, I just wanted you to see this. Now I'm going to show you something from the paper. I realize this is a little technical, but the most important thing, if you only get one thing out of this lecture, you should know that cell phones will open up voltage-gated calcium channels, and that causes lots of problems in the human body. Now, also, just in case somebody tries to tell you, oh no, well that can be a good thing. It is true that they can use EMF to stimulate bone growth, like let's say in the lower extremity if there's some type of bone healing issue. Right, but in general for your body, you don't want these reactions. It's pretty much true. Usually you don't want random unwanted reactions happening in your brain or your heart or other parts of your body. Okay, so here's the paper written by Martin Paul. It's from the Journal of Cellular Molecular Medicine from 2013. You can look it up if you like. And it says electromagnetic fields act via activation of voltage-gated calcium channels. Okay, so this is just repeating my little notes here, some of the things that happened in the pathway. And this is all the studies. So he's just documenting. There's tons of studies showing this. We went through all these parts of the pathway and the way you can stepwise block the effects of EMF by just blocking these different parts of the pathway would help to confirm that this is the pathway that's causing it. One other supporting piece of evidence is that these effects occur almost immediately. As soon as you expose the EMF, within 5 seconds, you've got elevated cytoplasm calcium. Okay, so the only way things can happen that rapidly is when they're happening based on electrical effects, like opening up ion channels. An ion is a positively charged molecule, and when it flows across a plasma membrane, that's a current. So that's what I mean by electrical effects. You have current flow, and the plasma membrane of the cell is really very much like a battery in the sense that you've got a charge separation across both sides. But the key thing is to know that you're having an electrical effect. That's why it can happen so rapidly. Anything that happens super rapid in the human body is usually an electrical effect. Okay, you can't send a hormone halfway across your body that rapidly. Okay. And this is just more of the same, showing that these enzymes, like we talked about, the ones that cause the pathway and the ways you can block it. Anyways, I liked this paper because I found it, relatively, I realize this is kind of complicated if you haven't seen it before, but I think this paper is as good of a concise explanation of it as you're going to see in the medical literature. And he cites over 50 papers, tons of papers that all support this. And I've studied this now pretty extensively. I'm going to go into more details about little components of the pathway in future lectures, but the key point to know is excessive exposure to EMF opens up voltage-gated calcium channels, and that leads to problems that are bad for your health. And that's why it's worthwhile to minimize your exposure to these things. Try not to, have your kid have a cell phone if you can delay it. You yourself don't sleep with it near your head. I got a whole bunch of other lectures where I'll talk about shielding from EMFs. And I realize you can't avoid them completely, but you can do a lot of things to minimize your effect. So anyways, this is just getting you started understanding why EMFs actually are a big deal and it's worthwhile to try to avoid them.